Hello, welcome everyone to this BERA webinar. Thank you so much for joining us today for this session. As you'll be aware, this webinar is part of the BERA Language and Literacy Special Interest Group. I'm Karen Forbes. I'm one of the SIG co-conveners, along with my colleague Barbara Skinner, who will be joining us in a little bit. And the idea, really, the topic for this webinar came out actually of the SIG meeting earlier on in the year, where we got together and we were reflecting on different key questions and key issues in the field. And this idea kept coming up, this question of the need to recognise the complexity of working with a range of different participants and multilingual participants in particular. And in terms of authentically representing the views of others, and in particular of those from marginalised groups. So we're delighted to have 4 speakers this evening, who will be each sharing a range of different perspectives on this question, and they'll each be sharing the particular groups that they're talking about, the voices of the unheard that are the focus of their presentations, and how they've approached some of these challenges. And we hope that this provides a starting point really for discussions. So the format for this evening, we're going to have 4 talks of about 10 minutes each. So they'll run one after the other, and then we'll have about 15 minutes or so at the end for questions for the speakers, for the panel. So please do make a note as you go along of any questions that you would like to ask, and we will have time for some of that discussion at the end. So without any further ado, I'm delighted to invite our first speaker. Maria, so you're here. Are you happy to go first? Oh, sorry, we can't hear you, Maria. I think you're still on mute. Oh, there we go.
Apologies, Karen. Yes, I can.
So I'm really pleased to introduce Maria Stewart from Ulster University in Northern Ireland, who will be speaking about researching multilingually. So over to you, Maria. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Just wondering, Karen, sorry, just haven't joined in late. Do I need to share my screen or?
Yes, if you share your screen, Maria, that would be great.
Okay. Okay. Apologies, everyone, few technical issues this afternoon. But my name is Maria Stewart anyway, and I did my PhD over the past number of years at Ulster University. And the focus of my presentation today is really on a barrier that I encountered whenever I was completing my PhD study and how I ultimately overcame it. Holmes et al. Used the term researching multilingually to describe those research endeavours that require the use of 2 or more languages. And in order to engage ethically and authentically with learners from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds, it is essential that we cross these barriers. And in my PhD study, I focused on homeschool partnership to support the linguistic and cultural capital of multilingual pupils in primary schools in Northern Ireland. So just to give you a quick run through of my content this afternoon, firstly, I will introduce the research context in Northern Ireland, as it is somewhat unique and slightly different to that in the rest of the UK. I will give a very brief overview of my research study, and then I will discuss, as I say, some of the challenges that I faced and how I ultimately overcame them through the recruitment of a network of volunteer interpreters. So some of you may not be aware of the particular unique context here in ANI, and hopefully some of the information on this slide will enlighten you to that. In the UK, there is a long history, well-established history of multilingual learners in education, but it's not the case in Northern Ireland. In the mainland UK, multilingual learners make up 1 in 6 of the school population. In Northern Ireland, it's approximately 1 in 20. And also, inward migration into Northern Ireland is a relatively recent phenomenon as a result of the peace process and the signing of the Good Friday Agreement. Those things have made Northern Ireland a more desirable place to live. Before that, people were waiting lining up in their droves to escape rather than to come to the province. And just to give you an indicator of the rapidly changing context here, back in 2015, Arabic was not in the top 10 of languages spoken in NI, but now it's the third most common language other than English spoken in the province. The Department of Education in Northern Ireland also release statistics annually, showing the number of multilingual learners in our schools. The most recent statistics, which were for 2022-23, showed that there are over 18,500 pupils in schools in NI. This is a 500% increase from 2006-07, and it is a number that is rising exponentially year on year. And other factors that make us unique are, of course, the fact that we still have a very highly segregated education system. Only 7% of pupils in Northern Ireland attend integrated schooling. And also, for a number of recent years, we haven't had a functioning education minister due to the collapse of the Stormont Assembly. So what is my rationale, the reason why I decided to research multilingually? Well, as I've stated already, my project focused on homeschool partnership for migrant families. Now, the reason why I made that intention to involve any willing participant, irrespective of their level of English language acquisition, is because I was aware that though there had been research previously conducted in Northern Ireland, the extent to which the voices of multilingual learners were engaged was very limited. For example, in a 2018 study by Jones et al., which examined the mental health of refugee students in schools in Northern Ireland, while questionnaires were translated into a range of languages, participation in focus groups was restricted to those children who had at least level B2 proficiency, according to the Common European Framework of Reference. Also, the underpinning theoretical framework of my study involved funds of knowledge and funds of identity. Funds of knowledge has been defined as the collective social and intellectual knowledge possessed by families and communities. So funds of knowledge may include, for example, the languages spoken at home, family occupations and household chores. Funds of identity refers to the funds of knowledge that pupils themselves find meaningful. So for example, their hobbies and their interests. As I say, this formed the theoretical framework of my study and led to, that the enactment of the use of interpreters in data collection and data analysis, because, as I say, I wanted to meaningfully engage the voices that had hitherto been underrepresented in research in Northern Ireland, and they were involved from the very beginning, at the commencement of the research, right through to the end. And this was a significant challenge, a challenge for several reasons. Probably the key one being the fact that I am monolingual. I am not multilingual to any extent. So if I wanted to engage the voices of learners from other linguistic backgrounds, it was necessary that I had to use interpreters within my study. Now, I had a very limited budget for this. I was a recipient of a PhD scholarship from the Department for the Economy. And with that, I did receive a research and training grant annually of £1,000. And I used pretty much the vast majority of that to fund written translation for my project. That figure was also supplemented by an additional pot of money from the Vice Dean at Ulster University. However, that did not cover the full cost of written translation. And I also had no budget for interpreting at the parent and the pupil focus groups. So I was left with a very big conundrum there. How was I going to manage this and do it? And another significant challenge was the fact that there is a dearth of guidance on how to research multilingually. So how did I try to solve this issue or problem? Well, firstly, I engaged with the Tutoring in Schools programme at Ulster University. The Tutoring in Schools programme is an initiative whereby students go and work in a variety of schools across Northern Ireland. Students are motivated to sign up to the programme because they can gain accreditation for the EDGE Award, which is an extracurricular award aimed at improving future employability. So through liaising with colleagues in the Tutoring in Schools programme, I advertised for volunteer interpreters among the international student body at Ulster University. When applications came in, I assessed each and then met with students who were volunteering on a one-to-one basis in order to ascertain their level of language proficiency in their home language and in English as well. Because of the fact that the interpreters would be working in school settings, they also had to undergo child protection and safeguarding clearance, which in Northern Ireland is called Access NI. And I had to manage that process, whereby the students had to give me their proof of address and also their criminal history from their home country. When we had, as I say then, our body of interpreters at that point, the next conundrum I was faced with was what guidance was I going to give them? You know, they were non-professionals. So I worked then with colleagues from the linguistics department at Ulster University to draw up a set of guidelines on how to do interpreting. Then prior to the parent and pupil focus groups, we held briefing sessions. The briefing sessions were vital for several reasons. My colleague from the linguistics department attended the briefing sessions as well, so she was there to answer any questions that the volunteers might have had about the techniques or the strategies that they could use in their interpreting. And it was also essential to get the students to actually buy into the project, to make them aware of, you know, the underpinning philosophies that were, you know, that were guiding the research, and to give them a sense of buy-in towards it as well. The briefing sessions were also good in terms of building up rapport with the voluntary interpreters too. My feeling was that the more comfortable they felt with the interpreting process, with the questions that they were going to ask, then the more at ease the participants would feel and the better quality of data that we would get at the end of the project. The interpreters were also given the questions in advance, as well as potential prompts, so that the flow would be more naturalistic. And in terms of how they actually interpreted within the focus group, well, the interpreters were really the conduits of information in that they interpreted verbatim what I said and what the participants said. And as I said previously, interpreters were involved end to end. So at the very beginning, in terms of interpreting documentation such as the consent letters, information sheets, so on and so forth, to the actual interpreting within the pupil and parent focus groups. And then afterwards, they were also involved in the transcription. And that was vital because it gave the interpreters the opportunity to include any words or phrases that they may have omitted in the moment, or to correct any errors that have been made. So in terms of opportunities, well, one unforeseen benefit was the fact that the presence of the interpreters aided me in that they were cultural mediators as well. An example I can provide of that would be whenever we were having one of our briefing sessions prior to a parent focus group, an Arabic speaking volunteer pointed out to me that a question that I was about to ask might be considered patronising by some of the parents. And he was able to suggest a way to reword that question so it wouldn't come across in that manner. And because I had a good relationship with the interpreters, the participants could see that and they felt more comfortable in my presence too. And because the interpreter was there as well, the participants could feel assured that their voice would most definitely be heard. And the impact has extended well beyond the scope of the study, in that 3 of the volunteers, interpreters who I matched to schools, are continuing to work within those school settings. They are available for emergency translations that need to be conducted, and they also would go and interpret, for example, at school assemblies or information events. Now, there has been much debate in recent years about the role of non-professional interpreters, not just in education, but also in health settings as well. Really, on balance, there are benefits for the use of both. And while it may have been, more advantageous for me to use professional interpreters throughout my project, if I had taken that approach, I would not have been able to engage the same amount of language groups. And because I wanted my study to be fully inclusive, so that any participant from any language background within any of the 4 school settings could participate, that necessitated the use of volunteers. And through the use of volunteers, I was able to engage 7 language groups and over 150 multilingual pupils and their parents. So really, just to conclude, and I hope I'm on time here, I wanted to give a final word to one of the participants in the study. At the end of one of the focus groups, I thanked the participants for taking part. And as I was leaving, a Romanian speaking parent interjected and said, "I want to say thank you. Thank you for listening to other people. It is important for us to see our opinion matters in the same way that we are asked." And I think that puts it more eloquently than I ever could. You know, the idea that researching multilingually, it might be difficult, it might present challenges, but it is absolutely essential in diverse societies. And if anyone is interested, there are the references. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maria.
Thank you.
And please do make use of the chat if you have any questions as we're going along. And sorry, a bit of echo. I see Jane, you're back in. Are you happy to go, Jane? Yeah, great. So passing over to Jane Essex from the University of Strathclyde. Over to you, Jane. Oh, you're on mute, Jane.
Sorry, I can't see where to share my PowerPoint now. Oh, yes, I can. I'm sorry, I'm not very used to Teams, as you'll tell. Right, I'm Jane Essex. I work at the University of Strathclyde, mainly in chemistry teacher education, but I'm actually particularly interested in STEM education for learners who have learning disabilities, and my primary interest is in those who have global learning difficulties. And this seminar really appealed to me because they're a group whose voices are unheard. And we heard earlier from Maria about, you know, people don't kind of change their ideas about who has things to say. People get stuck in old ways of thinking. And basically the learners I'm interested in, nobody thinks they can do STEM unless they've done STEM with them. And then they're really wowed and go, "Oh, aren't they great?" Yeah, they really are. And this is about 3 small projects I ran, which were really knowledge exchange, but on which I worked very hard to get evaluation and data and contributions from the young people with learning difficulties. There are various ways of looking at why they're marginalised. Partly I chose to work with children or young people in an area with high levels of coastal poverty. There is massive assumptions underpinning the curriculum and experience of these young people. They are pre-triaged out of so very much. Teachers who work with them are often very isolated, don't have the same opportunities for subject pedagogical development that those working in mainstream settings do. And then there's just this kind of separation of people like me and people like them. But I've done presentation because I just wanted to show you how glorious it is when it all works. We got sunshine in the west of Scotland, big whoop. But here we have 2 academics, a group of children with varying sorts of additional support need. And they're all considering how we could assess water quality. And I just think that shared experience and exploration is rich. And that's what I'm interested in finding out about. And I'm interested in finding out from the young people as far as possible. The academics loved it, so that was fine. So we ran 2 of these summer schools, and then we went back because my colleague from York University, Linda Dunlop, is interested in co-creation in terms of young people talking about education for climate crisis. And she asked me to do it. And I said, oh, I only really do stuff about STEM for people with learning difficulties now. I've finally got old enough and nasty enough to be picky. And she said, it's great. We haven't thought about including them at all in the consultation. So this was about these 4 things, 2 projects and 2 consultations in which I went out to get these. Oh, no, I did that. Sorry, that was genius. So I shamelessly went for money to the impact acceleration account, not because I really wanted to amplify anybody's impact. I really wanted to work with the kids I really wanted to work with. But I went to a load of academic researchers in STEM relating to sustainability and said, here, do you want to learn how to really widen your audience reach? And they said, yes. So along they came. So you had in that lovely photo I showed you a researcher from pharmacology, a researcher from the chemistry department, and they had a great time and they came back again and they wanted to do more. This is the sort of material that we derived, that we used to stimulate conversation, on the climate discussion. So this was something else, but by then I'd built up the relationships with these schools. And I think part of the Unheard Voices is about developing trust, that people who are accustomed to being unheard have to learn that we will listen. And I don't think it's as simple as walking in going, hi, I'm Jane, I'm actually really interested. There's more to it than that. I'm a very messy researcher. I'm not a very academic one. I am just a teacher that drifted into a university by mistake. And I really wanted the young people to tell us what they actually thought, what they'd learned. Oh, yeah, happy to do that. Shall I do? So asking them, I wanted to know for the first 2 projects, what had they learned about sustainability? Because that was my pitch, that we were going to learn about sustainability. These are young people who have low or no written literacy, or who are non-verbal. And sustainability, which I have taught at undergraduate level, is quite an abstract concept. So I really wanted to know whether they'd picked up any of these ideas about future-proofing our environment. And so I had to use what I could ask the young people reasonably to produce without it just becoming like another school assessment, because they did come in their summer holidays voluntarily. So as you can see, I chose quite creative things. And I know some of my colleagues go, oh, well, it's all a bit random. It is, but it was really ethical because they enjoyed giving us this data as much as we enjoyed teaching them about sustainability. And then, yes, there were high levels of inference in painted stones and postcards they'd drawn on. But I think that may be a price we have to grasp if we're really going to listen to people who aren't being listened to receive communication in a format that they're comfortable with. I am aware that some young people find it easier to express themselves even through drawing, but we included things like they could choose objects to go in a time capsule. They didn't have to speak at all. They could pick something up and put it in. Was I sure it wasn't all random? No, I wasn't, but there was a sense to the data I got that they did grasp some really big ideas. In the consultation, we had to think really carefully about simplifying the questions. And one group we worked with, they didn't want to answer questions. They wanted to work together as a group to give us a poem about the environment and sustainability. We took that. We did actually get meaningful findings that they understand sustainability, but in very local and lived terms. So is my beach going to be okay? That sort of response. Emotions, I don't think Linda had quite expected the openness about emotions, you know, happy faces, sad faces, comments about how they felt about the environment, which she done work mainly with sixth formers. And that many of those are very cool and very smart, and they're about to be undergraduates, and they're all very, very streetwise. Some of these youngsters were much more open about their emotional response. And they had actually done what teachers would call learning, but they'd learned quite a lot else besides. And I think as a sort of set of mini projects, I felt it did work, and it did increase their representation in the research we did. Do I think I've got it perfectly right? No, but I tried, and that's better than just pretending they're not there, is how I would defend it. Linda and I have subsequently drawn up some simple guidelines for people seeking to work with this particular target group. But actually, I know you won't be able to see it, but do email me and I'll happily send it you. All the things we say in it is really, to me, about being a good researcher and actually genuinely trying to hear what your research participants are saying. It's just thinking about some of the ones that I work with don't think as quickly, they don't have the language in the same way. Like Maria, I've read some stuff on it, but mainly I'm just really enthusiastic that these young people are seen as future citizens, active participants, and successful learners. And that's my wee presentation. Karen, do you want me to answer that question now?
If we can maybe keep questions to the end, that would be
that's fine.
And then we can just,
I'm happy to answer it.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much. And perfect timing as well. Thank you, Jen. So moving along, we have Ronan all the way from Queensland University of Technology in Australia. So thank you in particular, Ronan, for joining us at an unearthly hour for you. And over to you.
Thanks very much, Karen. So my name's Ronan, and like Karen mentioned, I'm joining you from Brisbane, Australia today. I'll not tell you the exact time, as I'd like you to think that I have some sense. And the project that I'm talking about today is set in Northern Ireland. It was my PhD research with multilingual adolescents in secondary schools. And I'll talk about how I worked with those students to ethically collect data together beyond when the students had signed those consent forms. But first, I'd like to start with what's a common practice here in Australia, which is to begin by acknowledging that I'm joining you today from the lands of the Turrbal and Yugara people, and these lands were never ceded, and those are where QUT stands today. So learning and teaching at my university, QUT, has a history of a couple of 100 years, but learning and teaching and research on these lands has a history of tens of thousands of years, and that continues to be led by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today at QUT. So Maria has set out a great context of Northern Ireland and multilingual students who are learning English as an additional language. These are my reflections and my experience and lessons learned from a 6-month study with 28 adolescent EAL learners across 5 secondary schools in Northern Ireland. And the purpose of the research was to explore students, the relationship between language development and social integration, and how those students made sense of their own experiences and how that affected their learning and sense of belonging going forward. First, I'll just set out my own positionality. Then we'll think about the importance of student assent and parent consent. So why is it important in this context? And in the next part, I'll set out 3 small vignettes or situations of challenges or experience that I encountered when collecting data in schools. And I guess the main focus of this for me is that my ethical documents, everything that I did was ticked off by the university and the ethics committee. But when I was in schools actually collecting the data, that's when the real ethics starts, and things change with students and teachers, and you have to make a decision of, does this align with what I was approved to do? And even if it does, is the context slightly different, and maybe I shouldn't continue with this, or maybe I should do something differently. So my positionality, I'm white, I identify as male. English is my first language, and I was born and grew up in Northern Ireland. So in many aspects, or some aspects, that gives me a different experience or a different positionality from students who are learning English as an additional language in schools. So when I was collecting the data, I tried not to present myself as the formal authority figure of a teacher. However, I was attempting to present myself as a responsible adult who was there to listen to the students and take them seriously. But just because I present or perceive myself in a certain way, that doesn't mean the students perceive me in the same way. So in terms of building trust in those relationships, my main focus was on being a responsible adult who was there to listen to these students and take their experiences seriously. The first part is the idea of, well, do we really need signed consent forms? And you'll see a couple of quotes on the screen or on the slide with conversations that I had with teachers in schools. Now, I completely understand where teachers are coming from with these quotes or these views, because they have a duty of care to students all day, every day, and they constantly make decisions about the best interest of their students and protecting their students from harm. The school leadership had evaluated the study, had met with me, and decided that it was safe for their students to participate. So do we really need the consent forms? And the next slide will show, yes, we do. And we need both parent consent forms and the student assent forms. So the information and consent forms, I had them translated into a range of languages. And it shows how important this was in supporting parents and students to give informed consent. And this was the case of an Arabic consent form where they decided not to participate based on their concerns about what the student might talk about or reflect on as part of their experience. So that for me was showing the fact that by ensuring that documents were translated and in multilingual languages, that people could more fully consent to what they were joining. But that doesn't mean that their consent stopped there and then. What I envision, or how I conceptualized it, was the idea of continuous consent, and throughout each stage of the process over months, that students often had the chance to give their consent again. So to really show some of the challenges that I had, or some of the things that I had to think about when I was collecting data in schools, I've set out 3 vignettes or 3 situations. The first one this was in the context of, there were 5 students in this group, and they all spoke Arabic, and they had a background from Syria. So I had met with them previously. They had agreed to participate, and we'd met a couple before to build that initial relationship. All but one of the students brought their all completed consent and assent forms back in. But in this context, when I was there to do the data collection and the group interview with those students, one of the students hadn't brought their documents back. And it became a situation where those other 4 students could participate, but they couldn't. Now, when I was reading literature and research methods and ethics, there will be lines sometimes saying things like, if there are some students who aren't participating, give them a different activity. They can go to a different area, work on a different worksheet, or do something else. So if I was to go by the technical terms of my ethics, I could say, well, these 4 students have agreed to participate. I'll collect the data with them, and I'm very sorry, but you won't be able to take part. To me, that would have been unethical because it would have excluded that student from their peer group. So I had to then step back, not collect the data that day. And what I did instead was returned at a later date, and students broke up into smaller groups to do the peer group interviews at different times. And this meant that no one student felt excluded at any time. So that for me was, even though ethically I could have justified doing the group with those 4 students, I didn't feel that I could or should have. The next vignette is the challenges or the complexities with peer interpreting. So these students were adolescents, and one argument is that who can translate or interpret better for them than their peer and friend who they work with and study with every day and who knows them well and who they trust. It's a little bit more complex than that, especially in the idea of instructed or top down, where the teacher, the researcher might ask the students to translate for others. These quotes on screen are students who shared their experience of being asked to translate by teachers in schools. And we can see it's not always a very positive experience from this. And the main learning I had from that is to not assume that if students share a similar linguistic background, not to make the assumption that they will positively engage with peer interpreting. They have many complex and diverse social relationships and identities well beyond the linguistic features. So that is not an assumption to make in terms of whether peer interpreting will always be appropriate. The other side of that is when peer interpreter can be more effective and more appropriate with students. And in this case, you can see from these quotes that these students felt empowered, they felt they had autonomy, and that they collaboratively negotiated peer interpreting with a friend or a peer who they trusted to negotiate with them and to represent their thoughts and feelings and experiences accurately. So what I did then in the research groups was to create an inclusive translanguaging space where, rather than instructing anything, I would say you can use any languages that you would like with anyone in the group that you would like to communicate during any time at this group interview. So it was about creating that open space for students to peer interpret in ways that they felt comfortable with. And just to wrap up, these are the 3 main lessons that I learned from this study, and particularly in the collecting data stage and the ethical decisions that I had to make, which were the risks of excluding a student from their peer group outweigh any potential research benefits. Avoid assumptions that students will be willing to interpret for peers when asked or instructed. And the other side of that is that self-nominated or collaboratively agreed peer interpreters can be a very empowering experience for EALD learners. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ronan. Perfect timing again. Brilliant. So that brings us to our final presentation by Zohra Yang in University of Cambridge. So over to you, Zohra. And just as you're getting ready, if anyone has any questions they would like to put to the panel in the time we have afterwards, please do feel free to pop them in the chat and we can pick up those after Zohra's presentation. So over to you.
Thank you. Can you see my screen? I'm not completely sure about.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Zohui, and I am currently still pursuing my PhD or degree at University of Cambridge. And so basically what I'm going to share today is largely based on what I've been doing in my PhD project. So for my PhD project, I've mainly been working with a marginalized group of English teachers who are non-native English-speaking teachers. I've been building up this teacher education program with multiple teachers all over the world to help them better be empowered in their professional fields and also incorporate global English teaching in their professional practices. So as we may know, actually more than 80% of these of our English teachers worldwide are actually non-native English teachers. However, they are a lot of them are to a certain extent marginalized because of their so-called less ideal cultural and linguistic backgrounds. That means they don't really speak English as their first language. So actually, a lot of these teachers have been told by people that they don't really have an ideal, like they don't speak ideal English, they don't teach English in the professional way as their native English teacher counterparts. Therefore, I've been using this methodology of design-based research as an effective tool to incorporate the non-native English-speaking teachers to share their insiders' voices about their teaching conditions, about the issues that they met in their teaching lives. So just a brief introduction towards how my project actually looks like. So basically, I've been running 3 iterative cycles with this entire teacher education intervention thing. And the 3rd cycle is still ongoing. So I've basically been reporting on my findings based on the first 2 cycles. So within the first cycle of intervention, and basically I conducted online intervention, including seminars and also written tasks with 12 non-native English-speaking teachers from over 10 countries. So it's actually a very multi-diverse group, and everything is conducted completely online and on Zoom. After that, I sought participants' feedbacks, and based on the feedbacks, I refined the intervention, which has been used with another group of non-native English-speaking teachers, also super multi-diverse online. And again, I received their feedbacks and then I adopted it in the intervention in the 3rd cycle, which is still ongoing. So during this entire process, although the teachers really enjoyed the intercultural communication, the online communication thing, that they feel like they really loved talking with other people, talking with people from different countries, there are actually multiple challenges that I met, especially working with such a diverse group of teachers online. So I've yielded 3 major principles that I've been using across the 1st and 2nd cycles, and also the 3rd one, to better tackle these challenges. So the first thing is about conducting inclusive research in a hyper-diverse online environment. Since all these teachers, they're from multiple countries, they're from different backgrounds, like they have different English learning and teaching experiences, and they're positioned in different social contexts. Their ideas, their perceptions and identities and mindsets about English teaching, and their attitudes towards the topic of native speakerism and global English teaching can actually differ a lot. So it is very important that I have been taking the diverse settings into consideration. For example, I've been trying to familiarize myself with how things are going, the teaching conditions in different countries, mainly based on my conversations with the participants in the 1st iteration and also the 2nd. And in this way, it can really help me avoid any form of overgeneralization and categorization of my non-native English-speaking participants who are from multiple different countries. And it also fosters an environment where the teachers can feel really respected and no one would feel ignored or disconnected when we talk about a specific contextual issue. And it is also very important to recognize the teachers' multiple forms of lack of capitals when it comes to teacher education, because I've been trying to empower the teachers to fight against native speakerism, to fight against these kind of discrimination and inferiorization in their professional lives. And I've also been promoting global English teaching. So, however, it is very important to acknowledge that teachers in different contexts, based on different things, they can be lack of capitals in certain ways. For example, some teachers from some specific cultures, they may find speaking up for themselves a very shameful thing and very unacceptable thing. So the way I handle this was to always empower them with all kinds of strategies, and like, for example, it can be proactive or it can be a very subtle to better help them make more contextually appropriate decisions. And also, since most of the teachers' current teaching curriculums and materials are massively dominated by British English or American English, so some teachers may find that they really have limited time, resources, and autonomy in teaching English as a lingua franca or introduce their students to world Englishes. So to handle this issue, I've been providing the teachers with some very handy materials and methods that they can quickly adopt it into their own classrooms. A very good feedback that I got from this was one of my participants, he is teaching in a middle school in the Philippines. And after 1 year of the intervention, he told me that he is currently designing a teacher education program within his local middle school, the school that he has been working in, by using the materials that I provided him, which proved that it can be very helpful. And also, for teachers, it is a very intimidating thing for them to change their mindset all in a sudden. So it's always important to tell them that it is fine to just take baby steps. And finally, since I'm working with a very diverse group of teachers, everyone speaking a somehow different first language, they can be very anxious when they start to use English as a lingua franca, as a communication tool, when they're communicating with each other in the discussion, and also when they're communicating with me. So I always highlight the significance of respecting each other's Englishes in terms of their accents, in terms of the mistakes that they make. So just to make sure that they don't feel that anxious about making mistakes and about their own accents. And I also allowed them to spend more time in the relatively more private breakout room discussions when they can just share their opinions with one or two other participants, which they found it was a great thing to do. And however, it has to be mentioned that some of those English teachers, they do have relatively limited English proficiency, that they sometimes feel it hard to understand what others are trying to talk about. So if this kind of thing happen, if I notice someone is not completely getting the essence of someone's speech, then I always try to help them paraphrase what other people are talking about by using vivid examples and anecdotes, and also obviously using simpler forms of the English language. However, there are still some problems that I'm trying to solve and yet to be solved, and they may be solved in future studies. So the first issue, and the most important issue here, is that how can we enhance the accessibility of online studies for participants globally, especially the participants from underdeveloped countries who may have limited access to stable internet connection and also good computer or tablet facilities, because it is so frustrating to hear some participants telling me that they really can't be engaged because the internet connection was on and off, and these kind of issues. I've met teachers who've been telling me, a teacher who is currently in Pakistan, she told me, like, every time when she needs to attend the seminar, she will need to sit in the middle of a field because that is where the internet has the best connection. So yeah, these kind of things is something that we need to consider. And also those teachers, they are not, I feel like it can be to a certain extent limited, that they are empowered only from the researcher's side, from the teacher education side. However, the environment that they're in are not always fully supportive of fully respecting non-native English teachers. So how can we actually take a top-down approach to create a better environment for our non-native English-speaking teachers worldwide? And these are the references if everyone is interested, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophie, and thank you to all of our presenters for just a really fascinating set of presentations. I've been frantically scribbling down notes, as I'm sure many people have as well. I've just got a few one or two general reflections that I've been thinking about as you were all speaking, which I'll start off with and just give people time. If you have any general questions for the panel, please do feel free to put them in the chat, or if you prefer to unmute yourself, we'll give you a chance to do that in a moment. So I'll just speak for a minute or so to give people time to pop things into the chat. But I think what really struck me when everybody was presenting was raising that complexity of these issues related to language and literacy in research, and that it's not just as simple as going out and interviewing participants, and there are so many considerations that need to be taken into account. But what really came through in all of those presentations for me is that when those are really thought about carefully, they have the potential to be really empowering for the participants, and I think that's what really came through, and that was a really strong message for me. And I think in terms of not only how the participants themselves are represented, I mean, there was a point about translating things, making the language accessible that Maria and Ronan, several of you spoke about. Jane, that idea of using other methods to involve students who might not have the literacy skills in particular to engage with things, to try and find a way of actually getting access to what they have to share and ensuring that can be represented. And that idea is a way of using research as a tool actually for empowering those participants as well, and for actually enabling them to take something from it. And I think also that it's not just considering the participants themselves, but also others around them. And I think that was really interesting as well, and something that is quite often neglected. I was struck as well, Ronan, you were talking about peers, and that idea of drawing on friends or classmates to translate. Maria, you were talking about the role of the interpreter there in terms of interpreting cultural sensitivities as well. And I think that's something that is quite often neglected, and something that's really important to take into account. So yeah, thank you all. I think really important things for everybody to take away. I'm going to stop talking now because I know we have some questions, and I want to give everyone else a chance to ask questions to the panel as well. And indeed, you may have questions for each other. Does anyone? I'm looking for specific questions. Does anyone have any general questions for the panel, and then we can go to specific things for individuals. If anybody would like to unmute yourself, if you just press the little raise your hand button. Okay, if we start with one of the other questions, I see here one from Alexandra directed at Ronan, but I think this actually applies across a couple as well, about how you find building rapport or trust with the participants. And did you find that teenagers were open to volunteer for the interpretation role? How did you deal with the sort of secondhand response? So if you want to start off, Ronan, and then if anyone else, any of the other presenters have different perspectives as well, they can chip in.
With building rapport, yes, it did take time. And that involved, before I even started collecting data, I'd visited each school and met with the groups of students a couple of times. And part of that as well was first being introduced by a teacher that they had a relationship and trusted. But then it was taking the time to talk to them about what the research involved, and then letting them go and have a think about that. And then it was also that they might not have had to tell me that they didn't want to take part, but they could have told the teacher that they knew, that they trusted, that maybe they didn't want to take part as well. They're volunteering for to interpret. I tried to just create an open space for that, because even from the experiences they were showing or talking about their previous experiences, where it's more top down and more being instructed to interpret for a certain peer, students don't always enjoy that, and their social relationships go well beyond what language they use. So I tried to create that space in the interviews where, if you feel comfortable, if you'd like to, you can help each other with language, and just create that trans-languaging space. There is the issue of the translation might not be exact in every case, but it was more that they had a relationship with that peer. They trusted that peer to represent them accurately. And in those group interviews, it was always a dialogue and a conversation between them when they were interpreting, and it wasn't they would say something, the peer would interpret, and we would move on. It was very much a confirming and back and forward to really get to the nuance of that, to make sure that they were comfortable with what they had said was fully translated. And it was the case where the students who were being supported with interpretation still had a level of English where they could communicate in English and they could clarify in English as well. So it wasn't a complete translation from their peer.
That's great. Any other thoughts from any other presenters on either that question? But I think there's also a link there in terms of, you know, building rapport, but also in relation to your own positionality within the research. I don't know if you have any reflections on how you negotiated your own position within your projects. Oh, sorry. Maria, do you want to go first, and then we'll go to Zoe?
No problem. No, I was just going to say, really, just in terms of building rapport, it's just that idea of not kind of just, I'm going to drop into the school to do my research, get it done, and bye. You know, it was a very slowly approach, where I was a presence in the school for a number of months beforehand. I was a presence in the migrant communities for a number of months beforehand as well. So I was a familiar face. They knew a little bit about me, and they knew who I was. So yeah, I do think, I mean, Alexandra's question was about time. Does it take time? Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just about that. Since I am actually an insider within my participants, because I have also been a non-native English speaking teacher, so there's a very, I always feel like the first encounter with the participant, the first time encounter with the participant is so important, and that's the absolute definite a valuable point to build connections. Like, it's always helpful to reflect on your own experience, try to build connections with them, and make nice and friendly comments on whatever they are telling you, to make them feel like you are very friendly. You can actually be sort of like a person that they can talk to. Yeah.
Jane, any final reflections?
Yeah. This is something I recognise, not particularly from this piece of work, where I'd already built the links with the school and we kept using them quite shamelessly. But I did do a previous piece of work where I worked with a school for children with what in Scotland we'll call complex additional support needs. So some of them in a hospital bed all day, being ventilated and tube fed, as well as some learning going on. And I intended to spend a year working with them, introducing science to their curriculum, which was really cutting edge for me. But I'd been a governor at the school, and I was really leery about the conflict of interest. And I went down about 4 times, and everybody was like, hi, but I kept getting treated as the governor person. And then one day I had this absolute breakthrough. One of the teachers ran into the staff room and said, oh my God, I've got to teach science this afternoon. I haven't planned anything. I said, well, what are you trying to teach them? And I helped him. I ran over to the shop and bought some ingredients for a simple experiment to do with the children. And that did it. I only had to break that one barrier. And he went round, and I heard him in the corridor say, God, you should go and talk to her. She knows absolutely masses about this science stuff, and she does know about our children. So if you can get a sort of ally, even if I was actually appalled at a teacher who was teaching in 15 minutes and hadn't thought about what they're going to do, but it did give me the best in, and it was, for me, a transformative bit of research for myself. And I saw one of the kids the other day. He came onto Zoom. I was talking to a teacher, and he said, hello, you still a science teacher?
Oh, that's lovely. I'm aware that we're just about at the end of time, so I'm sure we could stay for much longer and have lots more discussions and questions. But I'm also aware that everyone has probably had a very long day, so we'll finish up there. But I know there've been some specific questions as well. So I'm sure the presenters, if you're happy for people to get in touch with you individually, if there's anything that people want to follow up, so please feel free to do so. And thank you all so much for coming this evening. Thank you very much to our presenters for coming and preparing and sharing ideas. And hopefully there'll be lots of things that we can all take away from that, and lots of questions and points for us to continue to work on in our research, because these will continue to be questions that we need to engage with. So thank you all so much, and have a good rest of the evening, and we hope to see you at future language and literacy SIG events.
Thank you.
Thank you.